Bon, ça change les idées, hein? Good way to change our position, change our, open up our minds and get ready for our next panel. Now, we've got Gordon here who's going to lead. He's going to be our moderator. So I'm going to pass the mic right over to Gordon there.
There you go.
Good. Well, thanks, Rob, for that little bit of musical interlude. I was getting into it there. A point that Brandy made during her remarks was how difficult it was for her to connect with her community in northern Manitoba. And I would submit that the same kind of problem exists many other parts of Manitoba as well. There's a tendency for Manitoba to be dominated, the agenda to be dominated by Winnipeg. You know, the fact that so many of the people of Manitoba live in the city tends to make a lot of Winnipeggers at least think that the known universe ends at the perimeter highway. It's a very common tendency, and I know as a child of rural Manitoba myself, it really pains me when I encounter people that don't know where home field Manitoba is, where, you know, the home of a wonderful flour mill. So I've really taken it upon myself to raise awareness about the wonderful resources of in heritage in rural Manitoba. And so our three panelists this afternoon are going to raise this topic. In fact, one of them is so far from Winnipeg that she's in Saskatchewan. We thought it would be a nice way to sort of bring together like-minded people from the two provinces that I think share an awful lot. We've been talking, of course, earlier today about Saskatchewan and how they enjoy quite a lot of support for the heritage sector. So today we'll have three panelists. I will introduce them each in turn. I'll have them say a little bit, and then afterwards we'll have an opportunity for some questions. So our first panelist is Adolfo Cuetara. He is a successful entrepreneur, having created the company Dino-Kinetics in 1998. He became the main provider of paleontological resources for museums in Spain. He was heavily involved in the design and construction of exhibits in museums in Spain, Portugal, Costa Rica, and Canada for 20 years. And he even managed logistics in dinosaur dig sites in Utah and in Spain. He was commissioned for the development of exhibitions at the biggest amusement park and museums of dinosaurs in Europe called Dinopolis, and the Museum of Jurassic of Asturias in Spain. He came to Morden, Manitoba in 2015, became the executive director at the Canadian Fossil Discovery Centre in February of 2020. So I'll ask him to take over and speak to us for a little while. Adolfo, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here today in person. And yeah, what I am learning here today is that the heritage is quite diverse, right? And inside that world is a lot of different realities. Right now I am feeling a little bit tiny after the last hour talking about so important matters. So, well, for those that you don't know, the Canadian Fossil Discovery Centre is located in Morden, Manitoba. We host the biggest collection of fossil marine reptiles and birds in Canada. And the reason why we are in Morden is that because we are to the foot of the Manitoba Escarpment, and in the Manitoba Escarpment, we have the exposure of the sand sediments from the Cretaceous, specifically from the late Cretaceous 83 million years ago. So the reason why we exist is mostly human activity, because in the 70s, they discovered that there were a lot of mineral called bentonite that it was well worth it to mine at that time. So the bentonite has a lot of different industrial uses, and during 10, 15 years, they were mining all the escarpment, looking for that that mineral. Is in several layers. Originally, the bentonite is volcanic ash from volcanic events that happened at that time. So in between of those bentonite layers, we have the shale, and in that shale is where we found our fossils. At that time, Manitoba was a an interior seaway. There were a seaway communicating the Gulf of Mexico and the Hudson Bay. And that's why we have marine fossils from that time. So yeah, we are located an hour and a half from the perimeter, and that's a challenge, because obviously what it was told before, the people are in the city. So to be sustainable and successful in our mission, we have to attract people from Winnipeg. So we are heavily seasonal. That's another problem with the Manitoba winters. So I missed a part of the communications because I was driving from Morden to Winnipeg today. But it was interesting at the beginning, early in the morning, to talk about how the heritage organizations are struggling for the lack of resources. And that's a lot to think about, because I started this position in February 2020, and that was exactly 2 weeks before the pandemic exploded, and we have to close the doors. And it was a total disaster. When I started the position, the organization, the museum, was in very weak financial position. We actually were negative numbers at the time. So with the pandemic coming like a train, obviously it was a huge concern what is going to happen and the uncertainty that is going to happen in the future. So my work was at that time trying to find funds, and that's true that is a problem with attracting funds for to the heritage, but I will say that it's difficult to attract operational funds. So the funds that we normally need to pay salaries and to maintain the installations running. So obviously the most important part of an institution like that is the people working there. We assist and we can move and we can communicate because we are people working there every day. So the problem that avoiding us to have employees, specialized employees working there, is what makes the difference between a very weak and close institution with very few possibilities and very weak visibility. But when you are able to hire people and the people start to work, is when you start to feel that how much things you can do, how many things you can do. And we are lucky because we were receiving an operational grant from the city of Morden, and that allow us to have that minimum staff to work. But for funds for different projects, I think there are many possibilities, but those funds are always for specific projects. So you can find probably $100,000 for a project. Probably you can find not very difficult, those $100,000, but you need people to build that project and to make it a reality. So, and that's the problem with so many museums and institutions and heritage, that they don't have the professional people with the capacities to work in those projects. But there are, I think there are possibilities. There is still money available, federal, provincial, but you have to be able to have that people running those projects, and you have to design attractive projects. And that's the only requirement that I think you can get. But from my perspective, we are struggling and we are dealing with a low operational budget. We can't spend the money that we are getting from other grants in salaries, but we are moving forward with interesting projects. Actually, in 2020, I started to look for funds, and every single opportunity for a grant I was applying, designing attractive projects, and I think we were pretty successful. We got like $100,000 more in 2020 than in 2019. And in 2021, we keep the tendency and we got like $200,000 more than in 2019. And this year we are surprising $500,000 in grants, federal, provincial, some private, but still we are growing. We are growing in capacity. We are growing in projects, interesting projects, but our operational budget is the same. So we can actually grow hiring professionals to do and to move forward with those projects and more projects that we have in mind. So the way that we can do that and the way we are doing is that we are using and designing, using those grants and designing those funds to build programs and to build SEBs. And that way we are able to attract more people, so we are generating more self-generated income. So we are growing as well in operational grants, operational money, because we are attracting more people with those programs. So that's tricky. I understand that there is a lot of differences between museums, but it's more about the capacity of selling what we do in a, almost, I would say, in a commercial way. So we are protecting our heritage. We are in charge of that when probably it's the province that should be doing that. So we are almost doing that for free. But at the same time, we need to think, and because that, we need to think probably in the socioeconomic development of the heritage. We obviously are not selling heritage, nor are buying heritage, but we can make money using the heritage, and at the same time, we are communicating our resources or our story and our education. We can use our heritage as education, cultural resources. So I think it's the only future that we have, like institutions in heritage, is just to look the way to put in value our resources. And I am talking from our perspective that is obviously very different to any other heritage institution in Manitoba. I think we are the only heritage museum working with non-human made artifacts. So all the rest of the institutions are historic. They have constraints to a culture or a society, and we are working on fossils. So that makes a difference, but not in the way that we can use the resources to attract more people. And to attract more people means that people is going to spend money on us, and we are giving them a way of culture and education, probably mixed with some entertainment, right? Is the only way to attract those people. I think the museums are changing in that direction in the last few years. People is not actively looking for education or information. They don't like to read anymore. They don't want to learn actively anymore. They are looking for a way of entertainment, and they are like passively waiting for stimulus. They want the information to come to them in a visual way. So the standard museum, the typical museum, probably is in a very quick evolution in the last few years. And the tendency, I think, is that we need to incorporate a lot of elements from the, I would say, entertainment side of the things into the heritage, because I think it's the only way to be in communication with most of the people. And that's what we are trying to do in our museum. So we are right now building a field station. We own 100 acres in the Escarpment in a very fossil-rich area. So we are right now building with a $400,000 investment field station in this land just to bring people for dig tours. So we will be starting next year bringing families and people, anyone interested, and they will be paying money to be like paleontologists for one day and digging fossils with us, with a paleontologist in this property. So and then we are also working in a project for a new facility because we depend on municipal facility right now. For the last 50 years, we were buried in a basement in the Access 7 Center, and we still are there. So we need really to expand and to have a standalone facility, and we are working on it right now. And the design that we are working on it right now for this new facility is looking in that direction, right? In the direction of putting value all the resources and to look to the heritage resources like economic motor, a socioeconomic development for the community, and sometimes looks like it's not right if we are looking like a lot in business and in money, but if you focus in this perspective of the business and of the attraction, with the time you will get the resources to enhance and to improve the protection of the heritage and the research and the education. So that's the direction, like I think that every museum from the perspective probably should take a look and see how the things are going. I think we are about the time. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Adolfo. We will have an opportunity later for questions. So if anyone has some for him, just hang on to them, make a little note for yourself, and we'll return to questions once we get through the three panelists. Now, my organization, the Manitoba Historical Society, for 40 years published a journal called Manitoba History. Just before the beginning of the pandemic, we decided to extend a hand of friendship to our counterparts in Saskatchewan when their journal, Saskatchewan History, closed by renaming ours Prairie History. And I'm proud to say that our next panelist, Kristin Catherwood, has contributed our articles to the journal Prairie History. And I'm hoping that this is a relationship that we can only grow in the future. It's wonderful to hear perspectives from outside of Manitoba. We often face some of the same challenges. So Kristin Catherwood is the Director of Living Heritage at the nonprofit organization Heritage Saskatchewan. She specializes in community engagement and has a particular interest in rural heritage. Her master's thesis in folklore from Memorial University of Newfoundland examined barns and family farms in southern Saskatchewan. And in her work for Heritage Saskatchewan, she has engaged with over 100 rural and remote Saskatchewan communities. She has also worked in rural economic development, documentary filmmaking, and is a board member of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation and an advisor on the CC UNESCO Memory of the World Register Committee. Please call on Kristin to share some remarks, please.
Hi, Gordon. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for that hand of friendship you extended to us. We appreciate that very much. And it's been interesting for me today. I haven't been able to sit in on the entire conference today, but I've been sort of popping in and out and been learning a lot about Manitoba. And I really appreciate everything that I've heard today. I'm just going to share my screen. And can everybody see that? Someone just give me maybe a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, great. Thank you. No, I don't need to give better presentations. Okay. So yeah, thanks for that introduction, Gordon. And I just want to acknowledge today that I'm actually coming to you from Mi'kma'ki in Nova Scotia, which is the traditional and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq. And I myself grew up, was born and raised. I wasn't born on the farm, but I was raised on a farm in Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. And I just want to, say that this is introducing myself that way. Of course, maybe not of course, but when I was growing up, that was not how I would introduce myself. I wasn't aware of what treaty territory I grew up on until as an adult, and in my working life, I am learning more and coming to understand the history of Saskatchewan, of Canada. And it's something that, in my working and my personal life bleeds together now. And I'm really proud to have grown up in Treaty 4 territory, to have grown up in a rural place, and also recognizing and constantly kind of coming to terms with what that actually means in terms of our history and the history of Indigenous peoples on this land. So as well, I want to give our organizational land acknowledgement. Our work traverses the traditional homelands of the Nahia, Nahitha, Nahina, also known as Cree, Nakawe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Dene, the homeland of the Michif Métis, which are territories covered under Treaty 2, Treaty 4, Treaty 5, Treaty 6, Treaty 8, and Treaty 10, a place many cultures now call home, Saskatchewan. And we at Heritage Saskatchewan are committed to building relationships with Indigenous communities and learning to live on these lands in a better way. So I'm just going to jump right into, as I've been listening today, I've been sort of reassessing maybe what I plan to say today. So bear with me as I sort of maybe revise as I go along to try and meet what I was hearing or some of the concerns in Manitoba. But I think it's important to, first of all, give you a foundation of the organization I work for. As Gordon mentioned, it's a nonprofit. I know you learned a little bit earlier today about the funding models in Saskatchewan. So we are separate from government, but our funding comes through Sask Lotteries, and we're really grateful to have generous operational funding. Of course, we always could use more, but in general, we are grateful for that kind of funding, which allows us to do the kind of work we do. As an organization, we are not, we're separate from, say, the Saskatchewan Heritage Foundation, which allocates grants and designations for buildings. So we have a broader understanding and working definition of heritage at our organization. We are not directly involved with built heritage in terms of, we don't offer grants or designations. However, we do offer advice and guidance in terms of built heritage, but generally we use a definition of living heritage, which is a broader definition, which includes intangible cultural heritage, which I'm going to bring up right away because it underpins my work specifically. And when I was hired at Heritage Saskatchewan in 2016, that was what I was hired to do. I was hired as the Intangible Cultural Heritage Development Officer. And so that is the core of my work. And so I just want to give you this definition in case you're not familiar with it. Intangible cultural heritage is a UNESCO definition, and it's based on a UNESCO convention for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, which Canada is one of very few countries in the world that have not signed on to that, by the way. That's a whole other conversation I'd be happy to have another time. But all this to say that our CEO at Heritage Saskatchewan, Ingrid Kasikoff, is really interested in exploring this concept, and other provinces in Canada, notably Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec, have implemented intangible cultural heritage even into provincial legislation. We haven't gotten that far in Saskatchewan yet, but we are working hard as an organization to increase understanding of intangible cultural heritage, both in the heritage sector in Saskatchewan, but also in communities in Saskatchewan, which is my work is based in community. And specifically in terms of rurality in Saskatchewan, you may or may not know, Saskatchewan is one of the most rural provinces in Canada. It's sort of tied with Nova Scotia in terms of our population and how it is distributed, rural versus urban. We don't have a Winnipeg in Saskatchewan. We have several, really, they're big towns, but we call them cities. And then we have, of course, our two larger centers of Regina and Saskatchewan. But the population is much more distributed into rural areas in Saskatchewan. So that just means that, of course, we need to be looking at rural communities as well. As mentioned in the intro, I have a personal interest in rural Saskatchewan due to my upbringing and my own research interests. And furthermore, I found over the past several years of working at Heritage Saskatchewan that rural communities sometimes they don't have as much access to resources as urban communities do. And so I feel that it's our responsibility as an organization to be reaching out and working with rural, remote, and reserve communities as much as possible. So to return to this definition of intangible cultural heritage, perhaps you've already had a chance to read this. I'll just quickly run through it. So this is a very brief definition, but it includes oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, the knowledge and skill to produce traditional crafts. Furthermore, it is traditional, contemporary, and living at the same time. It's inclusive, it's representative, and it's community-based. So I'm just going to go into a definition that we use at Heritage Saskatchewan in terms of living heritage, which encompasses ICH and also tangible heritage. So it is broader. It includes ICH, but it's broader and it goes beyond traditional definitions. It's a recognition that heritage, like culture, is a dynamic force that evolves and adapts to shifting circumstances. As the world around us changes, so too does our interpretation of heritage. And living heritage informs our worldviews and contributes to our sense of identity. So working with those definitions of heritage out in community, I return again to the UNESCO Convention because importantly for my work, it has this framework and these 4 goals of safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. And so this is what underpins my work when I go into a community. These 4 goals are documentation, recognition and celebration, transmission, and utilizing ICH for community development. And those 4 goals get rolled into the kinds of projects we do in community, which is what I'm primarily going to be talking about today, is our heritage projects. And before I get into those, I just want to briefly, I've listed some questions here. These are the kinds of questions that when a community reaches out to me, or I get involved in a community in some way, I'm invited into a community, often the first step is going into that community and doing some kind of a workshop or a presentation about intangible cultural heritage, about living heritage, and then most importantly, actually working with the community to bring out those elements of ICH and living heritage. And so going through exercises that ask questions like these, like what is our community's origin story? What do local place names mean? What are the who are the tradition bearers in our community? Often use storytelling as well to kind of illustrate these concepts and make them perhaps a little more dynamic for people. And if I had more time, I would do a little bit of that with you today, but I don't. I want to stick to my time I've been allotted. So from there, working in community, and I'm going to just sort of, I guess briefly, basically, as I've worked with this organization, as my work has evolved and the organization has evolved, our sort of outcomes and deliverables have evolved as well. So when I first started out, I did a lot of workshops. When I talk about those 100 communities and more I've worked in, and I previously worked for another nonprofit in Saskatchewan, Sask Culture as well, I was out on the road a lot doing these introductory workshops, getting to know Saskatchewan, getting to understand the intangible cultural heritage that lives in our communities. And from there, starting to develop, okay, so we're coming out with all of this great material and information, and we're starting to understand what's at risk in our communities in terms of heritage. What do people want to safeguard, preserve, recognize, celebrate, document? What kinds of traditions do they want to be transmitting? And how can we use this material to actually aid in community development processes? How do we actually do that? And through a series of sort of trial and error and spending lots of times in communities and sort of figuring out how can I do this, returning to those UNESCO goals, we sort of devised this process that we now call living heritage projects. So to date, we've completed 5. Maybe if I have time at the end, I'll return to them and maybe go into a little bit more detail about each of them. And also I wanted to mention, I didn't bring anything into this project about budget, but I know that's been a topic of conversation a lot today. So if anyone has questions about how these were funded, please feel free to ask that afterwards. But the first project started out in a rural town, Coronach, and it was about their coal industry, which had a long history from the early days of homesteading and underground coal mines up to the present day, where they have a mine and an electricity generation station. And the impetus for this project was the announcement that that station, that power gen, that whole industry is going to shut down by 2030. So that was, and this is another key point I want to make, is that all the heritage projects that we work on are not just about, oh, this is a cool thing that happened in the past. There needs to be some kind of relevance to contemporary issues and a topic or a theme that is relatable to a broad swath of the community, so that we're not just talking to the folks who are already interested in heritage and museums, but that we're able to talk to and relate to a larger community and draw in a larger community. And so in a community like Coronach, coal is everything in that community. It's 300 jobs in a rural community, and knowing that it's going to be closing down brought up a lot of controversy, which continues today, a lot of conflict and a lot of fear for the future. And so we came in and did this heritage project, which we didn't really call a heritage project. We called it Coal in Coronach, but it was about drawing out that heritage and bringing the community together around a shared theme that was really relevant, and bringing youth into it, which is another key point I want to make. All the projects we do, we try to have youth involved in some way, which in this case included working with the high school students who went out into the community and interviewed people about different elements of the coal industry, the coal story in Coronach, and then writing essays that were part of this booklet that was published. There was also a documentary that we produced that went along with this booklet. So that was the first one. And then we did an elevator project, a great elevator project in the tiny community of Val-Marie. We then worked on Gimio Pimachinan, It Was a Good Life, working with the University of Regina and the Saskatchewan Urban Native Teacher Education Program about road allowance heritage in Saskatchewan, Métis road allowances. During COVID-19, I'm going to talk about this more in a moment, but we realized as this unfolding, the very beginnings of the pandemic way back in March 2020, that this was a historic event and that it was impacting people in Saskatchewan in very different ways. And so we took the opportunity to develop a project out of that time. And our most recent project, which we just finished this past June, was Black in Rural Saskatchewan, which is about the experience of people of African descent living in rural Saskatchewan, from the early homesteaders, Black homesteaders who homesteaded and continue to farm in Saskatchewan, as well as more recently arrived immigrants from Africa and from Caribbean countries who make a life in rural Saskatchewan. And we work with Black folklorist Shayna Jones on that. So all of these projects, as I've been talking about, they begin with community engagement, and our approach is very much place-centered and relationship-centered. So it's important to actually be in the community to do these projects. And that has, in the past, been me working very immersively in communities like Coronach, spending 6 to 9 months in these communities, not all together, but going every month, going back for sometimes a week at a time, a few days, lots of phone calls back and forth, really getting to know the community and building relationships and trust in that community. And starting often with a couple of individuals, which then leads to this ever sort of, it's like a ripple in a pond that just keeps widening out, and we keep pulling more and more people into these projects. As I mentioned just before in the last slide with COVID culture, so as our work has evolved, it's not always possible for me to spend that concentrated time in communities anymore. And during COVID, of course, we couldn't be making these face-to-face meetings. And so we were trying to be creative about how can we still do a project during this time. And so COVID, as crises often do, present a lot of challenges and also opportunities for us to kind of grow. And so in this case, we ended up building on past relationships that had been developed. We contracted 6 community coordinators who in turn interviewed they interviewed 30, I think it was over 40 individuals, but there was 35 interviews across the province. And so in that way, we were able to do a bring communities and voices from rural and remote communities into this project through these coordinators who were already immersed in their communities and already had these existing relationships. And so in that way, we were able to bring together this great document of COVID-19 culture, as well as several videos, which you can view on all of the projects to date, except Gimio Pimachinan have had a video component. And you can view those if you go to our website. You can access the YouTube channels through there. And on the COVID-19 Culture Project, we also partnered with the provincial archives to make those videos available to the public. And all of the materials that we gathered for these projects end up in the provincial archives so that they'll be preserved and available to the public into posterity. And so since that COVID-19 culture experience, we realized this is a great model moving forward, that we can partner with creative people, artists, and media makers who are immersed or connected with communities in Saskatchewan, and we can work with them to bring these projects to life. Because as much as I'm always trying to, all the projects we work on, it's always bringing voices of community together and having those voices be the forefront. Of course, with me coordinating these projects, it's always my bias and perspective as part of it. And I recognize that, we want to broaden our perspectives. And so working with people in this way has become a new way for us to work in rural communities and expand broaden our perspectives. So with that being said, all of these projects have relied on partnerships to some degree, and lots of community connections and people directly participating in the content that is pulled together for these projects. But as I've been mentioning, the last two, COVID-19 Culture and Black and Rural, we did have, we worked directly, contracted creative people directly to actually gather that content and bring it together for these projects. So on the right there, you'll see Holly Toulajour, who's one of our 6 community coordinators for Black and Rural. She's from northern Saskatchewan, a Dene woman who grew up in La Loche, and she's a social worker and an activist. And we wanted to make sure in COVID-19 culture that we were bringing, recognizing that in the past, in history, in the archival record, significant events like COVID-19 are often told through the perspective of a very select group of, elite, sort of the people who are in control, like the elite people of society. And that we wanted to make sure that in this case, we were gathering voices from a much more diverse and heterogeneous viewpoint of Saskatchewan. And so that being said, of the coordinators we contracted, 5 of them were Indigenous or Métis, and they represented communities all across the province. And so Holly specifically works in northern Saskatchewan, the far north. And so she interviewed 5 people from northern Saskatchewan communities for this project. And so that was a really successful way for us to reach a lot of rural, remote, and reserved communities. And we're really proud of the outcome there. And most recently, we worked with Shayna Jones, who's actually based in British Columbia, but she's doing a national project called Black and Rural, and we contracted her to work with us on the Saskatchewan segment of her larger national project. And so she interviewed 11 folks of African descent living a rural life in Saskatchewan. She's a performance artist, so she created a live performance as well as an accompanying publication. And so she was with us in Saskatchewan and did 5 performances. 3 of them were in rural communities. And this is a photograph from one of those, Louis Lafayette, who's 90 years old, a descendant of Black homesteaders, still farming to this day. His sister, Carol Lafayette Boyd, who's the president of our partner organization on that project, which is the Saskatchewan African Canadian Heritage Museum. And there's Shane in the middle. And this was from one of the performances of that project in Rosetown, a rural community in Western Saskatchewan this past June. So to just conclude, I could go on all day and go into much more specific detail about these projects, but I know that time is short. I just want to share this quote with you from a publication of ours over 10 years ago now, our former researcher, Sandra Massey. Heritage is not a catalog of what is dead and gone, but the texture of daily life and the constant creation of a rich and valuable future. So that is the kind of philosophy that we take with us into our community work in Heritage Saskatchewan, and specifically in rural communities, recognizing that we're not going in to try to, just catalog a dying community, preserve a particular building or fossilize some stories about the past. It's that we want our projects to be dynamic, our definition of heritage to be dynamic, and to be including a broad cross-section of these communities, as many people as possible, including youth, so that heritage is something that they carry forward with them as a valuable tool in terms of community regeneration and planning for the future. And you can see some of that if you do go onto our YouTube page, and particularly the Val Marie Heritage Project, the Elevator Project. We worked with high school students on that, and they made videos about the elevator in Val Marie. And then in turn, we made a video kind of asking them about their experience on this project. And I really encourage you to watch that. I can send the link after, or somehow connect you with the link, to hear these high school students themselves saying how, you know, this project made them think of their community in a different way. It made them feel more involved in their community, and it connected them with older people in their community that they would normally never talk to. They formed relationships and even friendships with, and that's a common thread we found in all of our work, is in creating the opportunity to connect youth with older members of their community and bring them together around these kinds of questions that I posed here, like what is the intangible cultural heritage in our community? It's really amazing how that brings people together and creates something new in the community that sometimes continue on into community development, which again, I could talk more about. But if you do have more questions, feel free to ask after Martijn's presentation. And also you can always follow up with me at my email there, ich@heritagesask. So thanks so much for inviting me today and listening. And I look forward to maybe chatting with some of you in the question period afterwards.
Thank you very much, Kristin. Some really impressive work there. I'm quite envious of the wonderful work that you folks are doing in Saskatchewan. Our third panelist is Martijn van Luijn from Dauphin. He's originally from the Netherlands, but he emigrated to Canada in 2001. With an educational background in tourism, he began working for the Dauphin Economic Development and Tourism in 2007. He later moved to Community Futures Parkland as the executive director. As an advocate for development in the region, he worked with many boards, including museum boards. He was the past chair of the Assiniboine College Board of Governors, the Parkland Regional Development Corporation, and Habitat for Humanity in Dauphin. His last position was as a municipal development consultant for the province of Manitoba, working with rural and northern communities and not-for-profit organizations. He recently moved back to what he calls his old stomping grounds as the economic development manager for the city of Dauphin. Martijn, please take it away.
It's always good afternoon, everybody. It's always good to be able to write your own bio, isn't it? I'm just going to go share my screen here too. Let me see. I'm on my iPad here. There, share content. There we go. I don't know if this was. Can everybody see this first slide? Sorry. Probably not, eh?
Not yet.
No. Share content. I don't know if I can get this to work. So I'm sorry, because I'm doing this from my iPad, and I don't think I can get this to work. That's fine. I'll just do it without. That's that's fine. Anyway, so I feel a little bit the odd one out here today. I got a text message from Thomas last week because he's an economic development practitioner himself, and I've known him. And he texted me, "Do you want to be a panelist?" Because he's a colleague and a good guy, I just replied the text message with yes, not knowing necessarily what I was saying yes to. But I was a bit of a last-minute addition, but it did give me time to think about it, and then I got an invitation to join today, and I listened into quite a bit of the sessions today, and boy, I'm ever glad I did, because it was very interesting, and I can actually say that I learned quite a bit today. So I speak today from an economic development point of view, which is different than people that are working in your sector. But I just want to maybe highlight today what could be opportunities for other practitioners in my field, as well as people that either are part of not-for-profits or museums or heritage organizations, how they can benefit and grow communities to be better communities, to be interesting for tourism or attracting events, and ultimately contribute to a healthy, viable community, and the challenges that come with that being in a rural one as well. So like my intro said, I grew up in a city in Holland. You could call me a city slicker that really learned to love rural life. And I've lived in Dauphin for the last 21 years, and I've really grown to love the prairies and rural life. So as a practitioner in the economic development field, I am, because I have worked and lived in other places, I can put that lens. I can change that. I can look at my own community from an outside perspective as well as from the inside, which is why I often talk to young people when I do presentations, and I recommend them to move away for a while, which not everybody likes when I say that, but if you move away from your small community and you come back, you have that other perspective. So the biggest opportunity that history and heritage and culture, for that matter, have for a rural community is no doubt tourism. In my field, we embrace heritage. We don't always do a good job with that, but we embrace it because we know that attracts people, and that's what we do, right? We're in the field of attracting people, so they come to town and they stay here overnight and they spend money. Except that I find that most rural communities don't really necessarily capitalize as well on it. And in Dauphin, we're trying to turn that around and really embrace history and heritage as an asset for attracting people to come and visit the community. So, especially nowadays, history and heritage are actually very popular. I know we have, most of us have a love-hate relationship with the internet and social media, because we have so many good things that we learn from it, and there's so many false information and challenges and out there that, but the social media and the internet have really contributed to heritage and history being a much more popular subject, where lots of people want to not only learn about it online, but they actually want to see it in person and they want to experience it. And that is something that we're trying to capitalize on. So we do a lot of storytelling. We spend a lot of time working with our partner organizations, which is the Museums and Heritage Organization community. Because in our field, we call them fully independent travelers, which is FITs. There is a lot of baby boomers and now younger people as well that really want to travel the country to see heritage. So I cannot preserve that. I can't create it. The only thing I can do in my job is promote it. So I need heritage organizations as partners. And the more we try to work together, the more successful we actually are in trying to attract more people to come and visit our communities. The other things that we really noticed as we were working together as partners, for example, with our 3 museums, is that not only is it good for attracting outsiders, because we all know that museums are often mostly visited by people that do not live in the community. So if we're trying to get people in the community involved in it, is that it really adds to our sense of belonging. Now, you all know that, I'm sure you do, and you probably know that much better than I do. But where it gets interesting is that economic development is not just about creating more economy or by creating more money or attractive investment. It's mostly, and at its basis, about creating attractive, livable, safe communities. Because if you don't have that as a basis, then people will not want to come and move to a community or invest. And heritage, telling the heritage stories and working with your partners has really opened our eyes, because we noticed that it created a much bigger sense of belonging, of pride for your community, not just with those involved, the volunteers. I'll talk a little bit about that later, the often older population, but even younger people and children. So we have some plans in the future, and I'll tell you about that, to even embrace that even more. So beside of tourism and attracting visitors, we really have noticed that promoting your heritage or working with these partners and bringing it out there, it really creates a sense of belonging. So the other opportunity for economic development when it comes to heritage and history is we own assets. That sounds really dry and municipal, but the city of Dauphin happens to own 2 out of our 3 designated historical buildings, the CNR train station and the Watson Art Center, which is formerly our town hall. And although the Watson Art Center is actually run by a not-for-profit organization, we, by having the municipality own those 2 assets, there is a buy-in. In other words, council really has no choice but to embrace those buildings. They have a responsibility to look after them. They have staff that can assist with grant writing when it comes to capital and infrastructure updating. And it's really creating this sense of responsibility. And that's, I think, if I might throw it out there as a tip, is really valuable. I know it depends on the council of the day, and it depends on who works, staff members or a CEO for the community. But I believe, and I've seen this in my other jobs around as well, that when a municipality owns a heritage site or a historical building or embraces that there's a sense of responsibility, and that ultimately will lead to preservation, to do more with it, or to create something completely different in partnership with that heritage location. I worked with a group in McCreary that have a museum in an old train station, and because the municipality got involved, they end up doing all kinds of concerts and art displays, which ultimately attracted more people. I recently spoke to somebody, and I've learned that Selkirk has the community, the city has purchased the old theater, which I thought was a really great example. And I think they hired a consultant to try to figure out what they're going to do, whatever the best use is for it. So that's another opportunity when it comes to heritage and economic development. And the last one, and it's really my passion. I'm a marketer. As my introduction said, I'm a theater lover. Is the opportunity of storytelling. There is no better place to do storytelling than with people that are actively involved in history and heritage. And I was so excited to learn, Kristin, I have never heard of the term livable heritage, and I'm so happy I just got to listen to your story, because storytelling is one of those things that will really help with that can lead to these things, and I'd love to learn more about it. So having said that, I know the topic of this panel is also about challenges, and there's definitely some challenges as well. So just quickly, with the City of Dauphin, you can look it up. I hope you've been here, and if you've never been here, please come. We'd love to show you around. We have 3 museums in the city and the rural municipality. We have 3 designated historical buildings. We also developed an architectural walk tour. We have lots of older homes, and you can self-guided walk around and learn more about it. We have our own hero called Billy Barker, who was a World War I flying hero, famously fought and was a very much decorated hero. We have a World War II flight school memorial. Dauphin used to house a World War II flight school. We have a series of bronze statues in our community, which is really thanks to our past late mayor, Eric Irwin, who was very interested in history and create a series of statues that people now actually come from far to see that. And pretty soon we're going to do something cool, because we have a series of traffic lights in Dauphin, mostly around Main Street. And all those traffic lights have a box, like they call it a utility box that sits on the sign. We're actually going to wrap those boxes and wrap. And we have designed, a local designer has created design. So I'm going to wrap them, and we're going to demonstrate our history and our indigenous culture and our agricultural background in that. So that's a really cool project that we're going to be working on. like I said, it also comes with a set of challenges. It isn't no surprise to anybody. I've heard this several times today that that funding for museums, historic sites, and heritage project is extremely difficult. In my previous life with the province, I actually used to manage the parkland part of the Building Sustainable Communities program. So I know, I worked with a lot of museums and was involved in a lot of infrastructure projects. And as Adolfo said in the beginning, although there is lots of opportunities to attract money to build something, it's very hard to find money to run something. And as a municipality, we often get requests from organizations for operational funding. So I know that's a tremendous challenge, and that's unfortunate. And I wish could be an advocate for more. So another challenge is in our community is our lack of Indigenous storytelling, Indigenous history. 25% of our population in Dauphin is Indigenous. We have many Indigenous First Nations around us. We are the home of the Treaty 2 office, and the Métis Homeland office is here as well. So we need to do a much better job in telling Métis and Indigenous stories. And I hope sincerely in the future we'll be able to work on that. The other challenge that we're working with in our community is we have an aging volunteer population. Many of the volunteers involved in heritage and history are older, and we have some difficulties attracting young talent. So any tips that are out there to do good succession planning, I'd be all over it. And our last challenge is wayfinding in signs. Like, we find that wayfinding in signs is expensive, but very important. People can't always find us, even though we're all Googling, but it's sometimes difficult to find the exact locations or find the stories. So we're trying to do a better job at that as well. So that's really quickly what I had come up with, and I would love to answer your questions.
Well, thank you, Martijn, for those remarks. I've been asked to mention to you that the Genealogical Society has a branch located in Dauphin. So hopefully there's some opportunities for interaction there, some collaborations that might be possible. Because, of course, genealogy is something that crosses many boundaries. Lots of people, of course, are discovering their past through genealogy, and the Genealogical Society, I think, is a wonderful resource for that. I know that I have many questions for the panelists, and I also know that our time is short. So I will defer to the audience if there are any questions posed by the audience. If you have any, you can either raise your hand, we'll call on you to speak, or you can pose them in the Q&A, or even write them into the chat. Please, if you have any questions for any of our three panelists, please do so. While we're waiting, I mean, I'll ask a question to Kristin, because you said that you had done all of these projects on local history, 5 of those projects that look wonderful, and you threw out the little teaser that you would perhaps talk about how they were funded. I personally would love to know, how were those 5 living history projects funded?
Yeah, so one thing I will say, and Martijn, I really thanks for your presentation. I really related to a lot of what you were saying. There's a lot of connection, as you're saying, between heritage and economic development. And that kind of actually ties in a little bit to my answer, Gordon, because each project was kind of unique in terms of who we partnered with. But for example, the first project in Coronach was really done on a shoestring. I think it cost like $5,000 altogether. And a lot of that money, all of it actually, came from the local community in terms of sponsorship, including from Sask Power, obviously our power corporation and Crown Corporation that runs a power plant there, and the coal, the mine, Westmoreland Coal, as well as the town and the rural municipality, because they do see like the project was something that was sort of positive in Coronach, that was could be tied into some of their tourism efforts. And so they were happy to give some money to the project to make it go ahead. And yeah, since it was our first project, we didn't really have any budget allocated in our own budget at Heritage Sask to do anything with it. So I really did have to kind of go out knocking on doors looking for money, but we were able to pull it off on a small budget. Each one of the projects, we did have a partner that contributed financially in some way. In Val-Marie, the village kicked in some money. There was also a little bit of local sponsorship there. Again, that project was kind of done on a shoestring. Gimio Pimachanan, we received a lot of support from the Gabriel Dumont Institute, as well as the University of Regina. We always give our own resources, especially a lot of in-kind resources, but we usually kick in some dollars as well. For COVID culture, because all of our travel for the year was not going to happen, we were able to just turn that money around into that project. In particular, we were contracting people to actually go out and do some of this work. And for Black and Rural, we received support from the Saskatchewan African Canadian Museum, as well as who got a grant from Sask Culture in the Multicultural Initiatives Fund. So all this to say, they're all funded in their own ways, but they're all done sort of creatively and through community partnership and through brainstorming together, you know, how can we find the funds to make this project go ahead? And I just wanted to make that point in a larger point that I often make in communities, because I made it very clearly at the start. I was saying, we don't give funding. And I say that because that's usually the first question we get from a community is, do you have money to give us to do a project? And we don't, especially for intangible cultural heritage, that kind of money just doesn't exist. At this moment, there's grants that are sort of related through Sask Culture that communities can apply for in Saskatchewan, but there's nothing specifically for the kind of living heritage work that we're doing. So we don't give out money. A lot of what we do is facilitation and sort of lending support to a community. And that includes, I'll say this to communities, if you want to do something, you need to figure out how to pay for it. And if you can get a grant on top of that, that's amazing, but don't count on the government or any kind of agency external from your community giving you funding, especially sustainably. There needs to be commitment at a community level to generate funding yourselves, and that can come through there's all kinds of creative ways that communities do this, as I'm sure you know, things like Chase the Ace, local kind of lotteries, like as well as sponsorships, fundraising through various means. And there's always a need for money and for more of it. But I really encourage communities to take the responsibility, not because I necessarily think that, I do think that there should be, because there's a certain buy-in, but also because we can't count on these external forces to fund our heritage projects for us. It's just not, it's not realistic, unfortunately. So there's a lot of creativity that comes in here, but also utilizing the capacity within your own community, the talents, asking for that in-kind support to pull something together that the community can really feel proud of and feel ownership in. So that's a really big answer sort of to your question, Gordon, but I know that this is always something that it comes up right away, is how do we pay for this? How much is this going to cost?
Yeah.
I could actually add something to that very quickly, Gordon, if that's okay. Because in my work in grant programs, I often work with museums and not-for-profit organizations. I said, if you do a JCAs or a hot dog sale or whatever it is you do to generate some money, is don't start spending it right away. I call it doubling your money for free, because a lot of grant programs will actually require you to put some of your own money in, and having that money in the bank will then allow you to apply for grants. The other way around, if you don't have the money in the bank, you often can. So if you make some money, if you do some fundraising, don't start spending it right away, but just kind of hold on to it and use it for a future grant opportunity.
Well, thank you, Martin. There are a couple of questions still in the Q&A, and unfortunately, I think we're just running a little long, so I'll have to close at this point, but I would like to end in thanking our three speakers. Very thought-provoking stuff. Of course, money does factor into all of their remarks, as it does in anything pretty much. And I thank them for their participation in the session here this afternoon. So thank you all. Oh, I'm asked by our Master of Ceremony to tell you that we're going to take a 5-minute break. We want to shorten it a little bit so we can try to get back on track. So if we can resume back here at say 25 after the hour, and we'll continue with our next panel. Thank you very much, everyone.